The rushing waters of the Snake River echoed through the canyon as Willa Parker's wagon teetered precariously at the edge of the crossing. The year was 1875, and the Oregon Trail had claimed countless lives. Already she refused to become another tragic tale told around campfires. The oxen bellowed in panic, their wide eyes rolling as the current pushed against their massive bodies. "Hold steady," Willa shouted, her knuckles white around the reins. At 22, she hadn't expected to be making this journey alone, but her father's sudden passing in Fort Laramie had left her with little choice but to continue toward the homestead claim waiting in Nevada territory. Her chestnut hair had come loose from its practical braid, whipping around her face as she fought to control the frightened animals. The first crack of splintering would send ice through her veins. The wagon bed shifted, tilting toward the churning water. Willa's heart pounded against her ribs as the river began claiming the wagon that contained everything she owned in the world. "Madam, jump clear." The voice cut through the roar of water and the cracking of timber. Willa turned to see a lone rider galloping toward her, silhouetted against the setting sun. He rode as if born to the saddle, man and horse moving as one across the rugged terrain. "The oxen," she called back. "I can't abandon them." The rider reached the riverbank and dismounted in one fluid motion. "Name's Ethan Hayes," he called, already wading into the shallows, "and I'll pull you out or go down with you." His declaration struck Willa as both foolish and brave, the kind of recklessness that defined the frontier. The tall cowboy moved with purpose, his Stetson secured tightly to his head as he battled the current to reach her. Willa felt the wagon lurch again. Water now flowed freely over the floorboards, soaking her skirts. The precious flour and sugar she'd carefully packed would already be ruined. The family Bible, her mother's silver mirror, all would be lost if the wagon sank completely. Ethan reached her side, his strong hands gripping the wagon's edge. "Cut the oxen loose," he instructed, his voice calm despite the danger. "They'll swim to shore if they're not tethered to this sinking heap." Willa nodded, fumbling with the knife she kept in her boot. Her fingers trembled as she sawed through the leather harnesses. The oxen, once freed, struggled against the current but managed to find their footing, moving heavily toward the safety of the bank. "Now you," Ethan said, extending his hand. "Trust me." Their eyes met his, were the color of the sky after a storm, intense and unwavering. Something in his gaze made Willa place her hand in his despite her misgivings about abandoning her possessions. "What about my things?" she asked, even as she allowed him to help her from the driver's seat. "Things can be replaced," he replied, his grip firm as they waded through the knee-deep water together. "You can't." The wagon groaned one final protest before surrendering to the river's pull. It disappeared beneath the surface with a sickening finality, leaving only ripples to mark where Willa's dreams had sunk. On the shore, dripping and dejected, she watched the spot where the wagon had vanished. The tears she'd been fighting finally spilled over. "Everything I had was in there," she whispered. "Everything." Ethan removed his drenched coat and draped it over her shoulders. "Not everything," he corrected gently. "You're still standing." "What am I supposed to do now?" Willa asked, her voice catching. "I was headed to Nevada territory, to Silver Creek. My father's homestead claim is there, but the deed—" She trailed off, realizing the document was now likely floating downstream. "Silver Creek." Ethan's expression shifted to one of surprise. "That's where I'm headed. I've got a small ranch about 20 miles outside town." Willa looked at him skeptically, wondering if this was some kind of frontier joke at her expense. "Is that so?" he nodded, a small smile forming. "Seems like fate had a hand in me riding by when I did. I can escort you to town, help you sort things out with the land office." And why would you do that, Mr. Hayes? You don't know me. Ethan shrugged, his shoulders broad under his wet shirt. Out here, helping folks isn't charity, it's survival. Besides, he added, looking toward the horizon, I gave my word I'd pull you out, didn't I? In that moment, as the sun cast long shadows across the wilderness, Willa recognized that she had little choice but to trust this stranger. The frontier was unforgiving to those who traveled alone, especially women. I'd be grateful for your assistance, she finally said, attempting to maintain some dignity despite her bedraggled appearance. But I insist on compensating you once I've established myself. Ethan whistled, and his horse trotted obediently to his side. No need to talk about payment, Miss Parker. First, we need to get you dry and fed. He glanced at her oxen, now grazing peacefully as if they hadn't nearly drowned minutes earlier. We'll make camp here tonight. Tomorrow, we can recover what might have washed ashore downstream. Willa watched as Ethan efficiently gathered firewood and set about building a camp. His movements were practiced and sure, speaking to years spent in the wilderness. As the flames caught and grew, she found herself studying him, the way the firelight caught in his dark blonde hair, the quiet confidence in his actions. You're staring, Miss Parker, he noted without looking up from his task. Heat rushed to Willa's cheeks. I was merely assessing whether you're likely to murder me in my sleep. This drew a laugh from him, a rich sound that seemed to warm the air around them. If that was my plan, I could have just let the river do the job for me. Despite herself, Willa smiled. I suppose that's true. She moved closer to the fire, extending her hands toward its warmth. Thank you for saving me. Don't thank me yet, he replied, his expression turning serious. We've got a long journey ahead, and Silver Creek isn't exactly paradise. Is anywhere in this territory. Some places come close, Ethan said softly. When the light hits the mountains just right, or when the spring brings wildflowers across the valley. He cleared his throat. But it's hard country, beautiful but hard. Like most worthwhile things, I imagine, Willa mused. As the night deepened around them, stars emerging in brilliant clarity above the wilderness, Willa felt an unexpected sense of peace descend. Her wagon was gone, yes, but she was alive, and somehow, in the presence of this quiet cowboy, she felt safer than she had since leaving her home in Missouri months ago. Little did she know that this chance encounter at a treacherous river crossing would alter the course of her life in ways she couldn't begin to imagine. Morning came with a soft golden glow spreading across the landscape. Willa awoke to find Ethan already up, tending a small fire where coffee bubbled in a blackened pot. The aroma made her stomach growl, reminding her that she hadn't eaten since the previous day's breakfast. Good morning, she said, sitting up and attempting to smooth her hopelessly wrinkled dress. Ethan nodded in acknowledgement. Sleep well, better than expected, she admitted. Though I dreamt of drowning. He handed her a tin cup filled with steaming coffee. Natural, after what you went through. Most folks who lose wagons in river crossings don't walk away to tell about it. Willa took a careful sip, the bitter liquid burning a path down her throat. My father would say I've always been stubborn about dying. Sounds like a man I would have liked to know, Ethan replied, his eyes meeting hers briefly. He would have liked you, Willa said without thinking, then felt heat rise to her cheeks. For saving his daughter, I mean. A smile touched Ethan's lips. I understood your meaning, Miss Parker. He gestured toward a small bundle wrapped in cloth. It's not much, but I've got some jerky and hardtack. Should hold us until we reach better provisions. They ate in companionable silence, watching as the landscape came alive with morning light. Afterward, Ethan helped Willa secure the oxen, which would follow behind as they made their way downstream to search for any of her belongings that might have washed ashore. "Tell me about this homestead," Ethan said as they walked, his horse trailing behind them. "What made your father claim land in Silver Creek?" Willa picked her way carefully along the rocky riverbank. "He was a carpenter by trade. When he heard about the silver strikes in Nevada, he thought there'd be good money in building homes, businesses, furniture. We were going to start fresh after my mother passed." She swallowed hard. "He never even saw the land." "I'm sorry," Ethan said quietly. "What about you?" Willa asked, eager to shift the conversation away from her losses. "What brought you to Nevada territory?" Ethan's gaze fixed on the distant mountains. "War has a way of making a man want open spaces. After Gettysburg, I couldn't stomach going back east." Willa nodded, understanding immediately. 10 years had passed since the war's end, but its shadows lingered. "My father was at Antietam," she offered. "He didn't speak of it often." "Men rarely do," Ethan replied simply. They continued in silence for a time, both scanning the riverbanks for any sign of Willa's possessions. After about a mile, Ethan spotted something caught in a tangle of driftwood, a wooden crate bobbing gently in the current. "Wait here," he instructed, already wading into the water. Willa watched anxiously as he navigated the slippery rocks, making his way to the trapped crate. When he returned, water dripping from his clothes once more, his expression was triumphant. "Your book survived," he announced, setting the crate down carefully. "The water got to them, but they might dry out all right." Willa knelt beside the crate, her heart leaping at the sight of her small library, water damaged but intact. Her fingers brushed lovingly over the spines of Austen, Dickens, and Whitman. "You have no idea what this means to me," she whispered. "I think I might," Ethan replied. When she looked up questioningly, he added, "Books are rare out here. Worth more than gold sometimes, when winter stretches long and dark." They found a few more items throughout the morning: a cast iron skillet, a ceramic pitcher miraculously unbroken, and a cedar chest containing some of Willa's clothing, which had remained relatively dry thanks to the chest's tight seal. By midday, Ethan determined they had recovered all they were likely to find. "We should start making our way to Silver Creek," he suggested. "It's a 4-day journey at a comfortable pace." 4 days. Willa repeated, trying to hide her apprehension at the prospect of spending so much time alone with a man she'd just met. As if reading her thoughts, Ethan's expression softened. "I know this isn't proper by Eastern standards, Miss Parker, but propriety takes a back seat to survival out here. I give you my word as a gentleman that you're safe in my company." Willa studied him, taking in the steadiness of his gaze, the weathered honesty in his face. "I believe you," she said finally. "And please, after fishing my belongings from a river, I think you can call me Willa." A smile spread across his face, transforming his serious features. "Willa it is, then." They set off toward Silver Creek, Willa riding Ethan's horse while he walked alongside, leading the oxen. As they traveled, the landscape changed gradually, the lush riverbank giving way to more arid terrain, dotted with sagebrush and the occasional juniper tree. Ethan proved to be knowledgeable about the land, pointing out plants with medicinal properties and sharing stories about the area's history. Willa found herself fascinated by his tales of the Paiute tribes who had inhabited the region for generations before white settlers arrived. "You speak as if you respect them," she observed after one such story. "I do," Ethan replied simply. "They understand this land in ways most settlers never will. Fighting them instead of learning from them has been one of our biggest mistakes." Willa considered this, realizing how different his perspective was from many Easterners she'd known. "My father would have agreed with you." He always said that wisdom doesn't belong to any one people. As the sun began its descent, Ethan selected a spot to make camp, a small clearing protected by a rocky outcropping. "Good shelter, good visibility," he explained as he began gathering firewood. Willa busied herself with what few domestic items they had, grateful for the recovered skillet when Ethan produced a rabbit he'd snared earlier. Together, they prepared a simple but satisfying meal, their movements around the camp becoming more synchronized as if they'd done this many times before. "You're not what I expected," Ethan remarked as they sat by the fire later, stars blanketing the vast sky above them. "Oh, and what did you expect?" Willa asked, wrapping her shawl tighter around her shoulders against the evening chill. Ethan poked at the fire thoughtfully. "Most Eastern women who come west are either broken by it within months or so determined to civilize it that they never truly see its beauty." "And which am I to be?" "Neither, I think," he replied, his eyes reflecting the dancing flames. "You have a certain resilience about you, and an openness." Willa felt strangely pleased by his assessment. "My mother used to say I was born facing the wrong direction, always looking west, when I should have been concerned with Eastern matters." "Seems to me you were facing exactly the right way," Ethan said quietly. Their eyes met across the fire, and Willa felt something shift between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits finding each other in this vast wilderness. She quickly looked away, unsettled by the warmth spreading through her chest. "We should rest," she said, her voice not quite steady. "If we have 4 days of travel ahead." Ethan nodded, respecting her unspoken request for distance. "Sleep well, Willa." As she lay beneath the brilliant canopy of stars that night, Willa found herself wondering what kind of man Ethan Hayes truly was. A cowboy, yes, but also a veteran, a rancher, a man who spoke with respect about indigenous peoples and treated a stranded woman with kindness rather than taking advantage. Such men were rare anywhere, but especially so in these wild territories, where law was often whatever a man decided it should be. Despite her efforts to remain cautious, Willa felt her walls beginning to crumble around this quiet, thoughtful man who had promised to pull her from the river or go down with her, and had kept his word. The next 3 days fell into a rhythm that felt almost natural. They would rise with the sun, share a simple breakfast, and travel until the heat of midday forced them to rest. During these breaks, Willa would read aloud from her salvaged books while Ethan listened intently, occasionally asking questions about passages that struck him. In the afternoons, they would continue their journey, Ethan pointing out landmarks and sharing what he knew of the territory's history. By evening, they would make camp, prepare dinner together, and talk by the fire until sleep claimed them. It was during these fireside conversations that Willa truly began to know Ethan Hayes. She learned that he had come west immediately after the war, working first as a trail guide and later saving enough to purchase his small ranch outside Silver Creek. He spoke of his herd of cattle with pride and of his plans to expand once he had the means. "It's not much compared to the big spreads," he admitted on their 3rd evening. "Just 800 acres and about 60 head of cattle, but it's mine, free and clear." "It sounds wonderful," Willa said sincerely. "To build something from nothing, that's what my father wanted for us." "And you?" Ethan asked, studying her across the flames. "Is that what you want?" Willa considered the question carefully. "I want somewhere to belong," she said finally. "Somewhere that feels like it's truly mine, where I can build a life that matters." "And does it need to be on that homestead claim?" His voice was casual, but something in his expression made Willa's pulse quicken. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "Until a few days ago, it was all I had left of my father's dreams. Now, She gestured to their surroundings, to the vast territory stretching around them. Now I'm beginning to see that perhaps there are other possibilities. Ethan's smile was warm in the firelight. That's the thing about the West, Willa. It's full of possibilities if you're brave enough to see them. On the fourth day, they crested a ridge to find Silver Creek spread below them in the valley, a collection of wooden buildings along a dusty main street, surrounded by scattered homesteads and ranches. It was smaller than Willa had imagined, but there was something appealing about its modest size nestled against the backdrop of mountains. "Welcome to Silver Creek, Nevada Territory," Ethan said, coming to stand beside her. "Population 326, last anyone counted." "It's beautiful," Willa breathed, taking in the panoramic view. "It has its moments," Ethan agreed, "though you might want to reserve judgment until you've met the residents." They made their way down into the valley, following a well-worn trail that eventually widened into the town's main street. Willa was acutely aware of the curious glances directed their way as they passed a woman in a travel-worn dress riding a horse, accompanied by a walking cowboy and 2 oxen without a wagon. "News travels fast here," Ethan murmured. "By sundown, everyone will know about the wagon in the Snake River and how I fished you out." "Will that damage your reputation?" Willa asked, suddenly concerned. Ethan chuckled. "More likely to enhance it, though I wouldn't put much stock in reputations around here. They change with the weather." Their first stop was the land office, a small building with a painted sign that had seen better days. Inside, a balding man with spectacles perched on his nose looked up from a ledger. "Ethan Hayes," the man greeted, his eyebrows rising at the sight of Willa. "Don't often see you in town unless it's supply day." "Walter," Ethan nodded. "This is Miss Willa Parker. She's had some trouble on the trail, lost her wagon crossing the Snake. Her father filed a homestead claim here before his passing." Walter's expression softened with sympathy. "Sorry to hear about your troubles, Miss Parker. What was your father's name?" "James Parker," Willa replied. "He filed the claim this past February." Walter consulted another ledger, running his finger down columns of names and dates. Parker. Ah, here it is. 160 acres, about 5 miles northwest of town. The paperwork's all in order, but—" He hesitated, glancing between them. "But what?" Willa pressed. "Well, madam, according to the Homestead Act, you'd need to live on the land, build a dwelling, and work it for 5 years to gain full ownership. That's challenging enough for a family, but for a woman alone." He left the implication hanging. Willa straightened her spine. "I'm aware of the requirements, sir, and I intend to meet them." Walter exchanged a look with Ethan that Willa couldn't quite interpret. "Very well," he said finally. "I'll provide you with a copy of the claim details. The land's undeveloped. Mind you, just raw prairie with a creek running through the western section." As they left the land office with the documents safely secured, Willa felt a mixture of determination and apprehension. The reality of her situation was setting in. She was alone in an unfamiliar territory, with minimal possessions, facing the daunting task of establishing a homestead from scratch. "You're thinking too hard," Ethan observed as they walked toward the general store. "Is it that obvious?" "Your forehead gets this little crease right here," he said, gently touching the spot between her eyebrows. The casual contact sent an unexpected warmth through Willa. "Walter thinks I can't do it," she said, focusing on their conversation rather than her reaction to his touch. "Walter's not wrong that it'll be difficult," Ethan replied honestly, "but he doesn't know you like I do." "You barely know me at all," Willa pointed out, though the words lacked conviction. Ethan stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "I know you didn't panic when your wagon started sinking. I know you thought of your oxen before yourself. I know you've read Whitman so many times you can recite passages from memory. I know you have more courage in your little finger than most men have in their entire bodies." Willa stood speechless, caught off guard by the intensity in his voice. "So yes," he continued more softly, "I think I know you, Willa Parker, and I believe you could make that homestead work if that's what you truly want." Before she could respond, they were interrupted by a woman's voice calling Ethan's name. They turned to see an elegantly dressed blonde hurrying toward them, her expression a mixture of surprise and curiosity. "Victoria," Ethan acknowledged with a polite nod. "Everyone's talking about how you rescued some poor soul from the river," the woman said, her eyes moving to Willa with undisguised assessment. "I see the rumors were true." "Victoria Blackwell, meet Willa Parker," Ethan introduced them. "Willa's come to claim her father's homestead." Victoria's perfectly arched eyebrows rose slightly. "Oh, which parcel?" "The northwest section, about 5 miles out," Willa replied, instantly disliking the way Victoria's gaze seemed to be cataloging her shortcomings. "Ah, the old Miller place," Victoria said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Rather isolated, and in terrible condition, I'm afraid. The previous settlers abandoned it after just one winter." Willa felt her heart sink but kept her expression neutral. "I'm sure with hard work it can be made habitable." "Of course," Victoria agreed too quickly, "though winter comes early in these parts." She turned her attention back to Ethan. "Will you be at the Founders' Day dance next Saturday?" "Father was just saying he hoped to discuss that water rights issue with you." "I hadn't planned on it," Ethan replied, his tone cooler than Willa had heard it before. "Well, do reconsider," Victoria pressed, laying a familiar hand on his arm. "Everyone will be there." Her gaze flicked back to Willa. "You should come too, Miss Parker. It would be a wonderful opportunity to meet the community." With that, Victoria continued on her way, leaving Willa with the distinct impression she had just been sized up and found wanting by one of Silver Creek's social leaders. "Don't mind Victoria," Ethan said as they resumed walking. "Her father owns the largest ranch in the county and the bank besides. She's used to people treating her words as gospel." "She seems quite familiar with you," Willa observed carefully. A shadow crossed Ethan's face. "There was a time when our families thought we might suit. That time has passed." They reached the general store, where Ethan introduced Willa to the proprietor, a jovial man named Franklin who insisted everyone call him Frank. Unlike Victoria, he seemed genuinely delighted to meet a new settler. "Always happy to see fresh faces in Silver Creek," he declared, beaming at Willa. "Especially ones with the gumption to take on a homestead claim." While Willa surveyed the store's offerings, mentally calculating what essentials she could afford with her limited funds, she overheard Ethan speaking quietly with Frank near the counter. Though she couldn't make out their exact words, she caught Frank nodding seriously before disappearing into a back room. When they left the store an hour later, Willa was puzzled to find their purchases included far more supplies than she had selected: sacks of flour and sugar, coffee, salt pork, tools, fabric, and even a small cook stove. "I can't possibly afford all this," she protested as they loaded the items onto a wagon Frank had loaned them. "Consider it an advance," Ethan said, securing a crate of canned goods. "Frank's agreed to extend you credit until you get established." "It's how things work out here, neighbors helping neighbors." Willa frowned. "But we're not neighbors, and I can't accept charity." "We're 5 miles apart as the crow flies. That makes us neighbors by Western standards," Ethan replied with a smile. "And it's not charity. Frank knows you'll honor your debts once you're able." "And how does he know that?" "He just met me." Ethan's expression softened. "Because I vouched for you. My word carries weight in Silver Creek." Willa felt simultaneously grateful and uncomfortable. "Thank you," she said finally. "I will repay every cent." As the day waned, they made one final stop at the livery stable, where Ethan arranged for Willa to purchase a sturdy mare at a surprisingly reasonable price. By the time they set out for her homestead claim, the sun was beginning its descent toward the mountains. "We won't make it before dark," Ethan observed. "We can camp about halfway and arrive in the morning." Willa nodded, a sudden weariness settling over her. The past few days had been a whirlwind of emotions and challenges, and the reality of what lay ahead was beginning to feel overwhelming. They made camp that night in a sheltered grove, the supplies from town secured in the borrowed wagon. As they sat by the fire after their evening meal, Willa found herself studying Ethan's profile, wondering what would become of their unusual friendship once she was settled on her land. "What's on your mind?" he asked, catching her gaze. "I was thinking about tomorrow," she admitted, "about seeing the homestead for the first time. Nervous, terrified," she confessed with a small laugh, "but determined." Ethan nodded approvingly. "That's the right combination for survival out here." "What about after tomorrow?" Willa asked, voicing the question that had been nagging at her. "You've been incredibly kind, Ethan, but you must have your own responsibilities, your own life to return to." He was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames. "My ranch isn't far from your claim," he said finally. "I could check in now and then, help with the heavier work, if you're amenable." Relief flooded through Willa at the thought of not facing this challenge entirely alone. "I would appreciate that more than I can say," she replied softly, "though I don't want to be a burden." "You're many things, Willa Parker," Ethan said, his gaze meeting hers across the fire. "A burden isn't one of them." The intensity in his blue eyes made her breath catch. In that moment, Willa realized that somewhere between the sinking wagon and this quiet campfire, Ethan Hayes had become more than just her rescuer. He had become someone she trusted, someone whose presence she had come to value in ways she hadn't anticipated. "We should rest," she said, breaking the spell between them. "Tomorrow will be a long day." Ethan nodded, though his eyes lingered on her face a moment longer. "Tomorrow," he agreed. As Willa settled into her bedroll beneath the stars, she found herself thinking not of the homestead that awaited her, but of the man sleeping just a few feet away, a man who had promised to pull her from a river or go down with her, and who seemed equally committed to seeing her succeed in this wild territory she now called home. Morning brought a clear sky and a sense of anticipation as they continued their journey to Willa's homestead. The terrain gradually changed from the flat prairie around Silver Creek to more varied landscape, with gentle hills and scattered stands of pine and aspen. "There," Ethan said eventually, pointing ahead to where the land dipped into a shallow valley. "That's your 160 acres." Willa shaded her eyes against the sun, taking in the property that was now hers to tame. A small creek wound through the western portion, just as Walter had mentioned, its banks lined with cottonwoods. The rest was primarily open grassland, with a gentle slope rising toward the east where a few pines stood sentinel against the sky. At the center of the property, barely visible from their vantage point, was what appeared to be the remains of a cabin, little more than a partial foundation, and a chimney standing alone like an accusing finger pointed at the heavens. Victoria wasn't exaggerating about the condition, Willa said, trying to keep disappointment from her voice. "The foundation's solid," Ethan observed as they drew closer. "That's the hardest part. The rest is just labor." They stopped the wagon near the ruins of the cabin. Up close, Willa could see that the previous settlers had managed to build a stone foundation and chimney before abandoning their efforts. A few blackened timbers suggested the wooden portions had been destroyed by fire rather than simply falling into disrepair. "What do you think happened?" she asked, running her hand along the rough stones. "Hard to say," Ethan replied, examining the site with a critical eye. "Could have been a cooking fire that got out of control, or maybe trouble with locals." He must have seen the alarm on her face because he quickly added, "Not Indians, more likely claim jumpers or rustlers passing through. This territory was wilder a few years back." Willa tried to imagine the family who had started this homestead, their hopes, their struggles, the events that had finally driven them away. Had they been as determined as she was? Had they felt the same mixture of fear and excitement as they stood on this land for the first time? "It's a good spot," Ethan said, breaking into her thoughts. "Close enough to water but high enough not to flood in spring. Good soil from what I can tell. The creek probably has trout." Willa nodded, beginning to see the possibilities through his eyes. "We could rebuild the cabin here," she said, walking the perimeter of the foundation. "Perhaps a bit larger than the original plan." Ethan asked, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Heat rushed to Willa's cheeks. That is, I would build." "I know what you meant," he said gently. "And you're right, we could have the basic structure up before the first snow if we start soon. 4 walls and a roof at minimum." The casual way he included himself in her plans warmed something inside Willa. She turned away to hide her expression, surveying the rest of the property. "What would you do first if this were your land?" Ethan considered for a moment. "Clear the old debris, salvage what we can from the original structure, set up a temporary shelter while we work on the permanent one." He gestured toward a flat area near the creek. "That would be a good garden plot come spring, southern exposure, good drainage." They spent the rest of the morning exploring the property. With Ethan pointing out features Willa might not have noticed on her own: a natural spring feeding into the creek, a sheltered hollow where wild berries grew, the tracks of deer and other game that would provide meat through the winter. By midday, they had unloaded the supplies from the wagon and constructed a basic lean-to against the stone chimney, providing Willa with temporary shelter until proper walls could be raised. "It's not much," Ethan apologized as they finished securing the canvas roof. "It's a start," Willa replied, surprising herself with her optimism. "More than I had yesterday." They broke for a simple lunch, sitting on logs they dragged near the foundation to serve as makeshift seating. As they ate, Ethan sketched out a plan for the cabin in the dirt with a stick, a modest but practical design with a main room, a small bedroom, and an attached lean-to for storage. "I can bring timber from my property," he offered. "I've got a stand of pines I've been meaning to thin anyway. Save you having to purchase lumber in town." "Ethan," Willa said, setting down her plate, "why are you doing all this? You've already gone far beyond what anyone would expect from a chance encounter at a river crossing." He was quiet for a long moment, poking at the dirt with his stick. "When I came west after the war, I was lost," he finally said. "Not just geographically. I'd seen things, done things that haunted me. Felt like I had no place in the world anymore." Willa remained silent, sensing he rarely spoke of this. "An old rancher named Henry took me in," Ethan continued. "Taught me everything I know about cattle, about surviving out here. Never asked for anything in return, just said that one day I'd have the chance to do the same for someone else." His eyes met hers. "I guess this is that chance." The simplicity of his explanation touched Willa deeply. "Well," she said, her voice slightly unsteady, "Henry would be proud of you." Something shifted in Ethan's expression, a softening, a vulnerability he rarely showed. "I hope so," he said quietly. They worked side by side for the remainder of the day, clearing debris and salvaging usable materials from the original structure. By the time the sun began to set, they had made significant progress, and Willa's temporary shelter was stocked with enough provisions to last her at least 2 weeks. "I should head back to my ranch," Ethan said as they stood before the completed lean-to. "My foreman's capable, but I've been gone longer than planned." Willa felt a surge of panic at the thought of being left alone in this wilderness, but she quashed it quickly. This was her choice, her land. She would not falter at the first test of her resolve. "Of course," she said, striving for a confidence she didn't entirely feel. "You've done more than enough already." Ethan studied her face. "I'll be back in 3 days with timber and tools," he promised. "Sooner if you need anything." "My ranch is due east. Follow the creek upstream about 4 miles, then head north when it forks. You can't miss the fence line." Willa nodded, memorizing the directions. "I'll be fine," she assured him. "There's plenty to keep me busy until you return." As Ethan prepared to leave, loading his few possessions onto his horse, an awkward tension settled between them, neither quite knowing how to say goodbye after the intimacy of their journey together. "Thank you," Willa said finally, extending her hand formally. "For everything." Ethan took her hand, but instead of shaking it, he held it gently between both of his. "Bar your door at night," he instructed. "Keep your rifle close. If you hear anything unusual, fire 3 shots in the air. I'll come running." The concern in his eyes made something flutter in Willa's chest. "I will," she promised. With obvious reluctance, Ethan released her hand and mounted his horse. 3 days," he repeated. "I'll hold you to that, Mr. Hayes," Willa replied with more lightness than she felt. She watched as he rode away, becoming smaller and smaller against the vast landscape until he disappeared from view entirely. Only then did she allow herself to truly feel the enormity of what lay ahead: the solitude, the labor, the uncertainties of frontier life. But as she turned to face her small shelter and the foundation of what would become her home, Willa felt a surprising sense of rightness. This land, wild as it was, called to something deep within her. And for the first time since her father's passing, she felt as though she might be exactly where she belonged. That night, as Willa lay in her makeshift bed listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the wilderness around her, she found herself thinking of Ethan, his quiet strength, his kindness, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. In just a few days, this man had become important to her in ways she couldn't fully articulate. 3 days, she whispered to herself, already counting the hours until his return. The following morning, Willa rose with the sun, determined to make progress on clearing the homestead before Ethan returned. She worked methodically, removing stones and debris from what would become her garden plot, collecting kindling for her fire, and exploring the boundaries of her property more thoroughly. By midday, she had discovered a small grove of apple trees on the northeastern corner of the land, overgrown and untended, but still bearing fruit. The previous settlers must have planted them, a small act of hope for a future they never got to see. Willa picked several of the apples, finding them tart but edible. "Thank you," she said aloud to the unknown family who had left this unexpected gift behind. "I'll take better care of them now." The days passed more quickly than Willa had anticipated, filled with physical labor that left her exhausted but satisfied each evening. She established a routine, rising with the sun and working until dusk, taking breaks only to eat and rest briefly during the hottest part of the day. On the morning of the 3rd day, Willa found herself watching the eastern horizon more often than was strictly necessary, anticipating Ethan's return. When she finally spotted a wagon approaching in the distance, her heart leapt in a way that should have alarmed her but somehow didn't. As the wagon drew closer, she realized Ethan wasn't alone. Another man accompanied him, older, with a weather-beaten face and gray-streaked beard. "Morning, Miss Parker," Ethan called as they approached. "Hope you don't mind, but I brought some help. This is Caleb Jenkins, best carpenter in Silver Creek." The older man tipped his hat politely. "Madam, Mr. Jenkins," Willa greeted him, "any help is most welcome." "Ethan here says you're planning to rebuild on the old Miller foundation," Caleb said, already climbing down from the wagon to inspect the site. "Good choice. Jasper Miller was a fool about many things, but he knew how to lay stone." Willa glanced at Ethan questioningly. "Caleb knew the family who lived here before," Ethan explained quietly. "Thought his expertise might be useful." "Very useful," Willa agreed, watching as the older man walked the perimeter of the foundation, nodding to himself occasionally. The wagon was loaded with timber rough-cut pine logs of various lengths along with additional tools and supplies Willa hadn't expected. Most surprising was a small wooden crate that clucked indignantly when Ethan lifted it down. "Chickens?" Willa asked, peering into the crate to find 3 hens regarding her suspiciously. "Eggs are good protein," Ethan said with a shrug, "and they'll help keep bugs down around the garden. They're from my personal flock." The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched Willa deeply. "Thank you," she said, her voice softer than she intended. Ethan's eyes met hers, holding for a beat longer than necessary. "You've made good progress here," he observed, looking around the clearing. "Found the apple trees, I see." "Yesterday," Willa confirmed. "They need pruning, but the fruit is still good." "Apple pie come winter," Caleb commented approvingly as he rejoined them. "If we get this cabin up in time, that is. Better get to work." The next several hours were a flurry of activity as the 3 of them worked together to begin framing the cabin walls. Caleb proved to be as skilled as Ethan had claimed, directing their efforts with the precision of someone who had built countless structures over the years. By late afternoon, the basic frame of the main room was standing, attached securely to the stone foundation. Willa felt a surge of pride as she stepped back to observe their progress. This was no longer just a dream or a mark on a map. It was becoming real, tangible. "We'll get the roof beam up tomorrow," Caleb announced, wiping sweat from his brow. "Then start on the walls proper. With good weather and hard work, you could be sleeping inside real walls within 2 weeks." "I can't thank you enough for your help," Willa said sincerely. The older man waved off her gratitude. "Been too long since this valley had a new homestead going up. Does my heart good to see it." He glanced between Willa and Ethan with a knowing look. "Besides, any friend of Ethan's is a friend of mine. He doesn't vouch for just anybody." As the sun began to set, Caleb announced he would head back to town for the night, returning in the morning with additional supplies. "My old bones need a proper bed," he explained. "Not built for camping anymore." After Caleb departed, Willa and Ethan sat outside her lean-to, eating a simple dinner as the first stars appeared overhead. There was a comfortable familiarity to their silence, the ease of people who had quickly come to understand each other's rhythms. "How was your ranch?" Willa asked eventually. "Standing right where I left it," Ethan replied with a smile. "Wesley, my foreman, had everything well in hand, even delivered a healthy calf while I was gone." "You must be eager to get back to your normal routine," Willa observed, studying his profile in the firelight. Rather than helping a stranger build a cabin, Ethan turned to face her fully. "You're not a stranger, Willa," he said quietly. "Not anymore." The simple statement hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning neither was quite ready to address directly. Willa felt heat rise to her cheeks and looked away, focusing on the embers of their campfire. "I found something today I wanted to show you," she said, changing the subject. She reached into her pocket and withdrew a small object. It was half buried near the apple trees. Ethan leaned closer to examine what she held, a child's toy, a small wooden horse carved with obvious care and attention to detail. Though worn by weather and time, the craftsmanship was evident. "One of the Miller children must have left it behind," he said softly. "Or lost it," Willa suggested, running her finger along the smooth curve of the toy's back. "I keep thinking about them, wondering if they made it somewhere safe, if they started over somewhere else." "People are resilient," Ethan said, "especially children. Still, I can't help but feel like I'm building my future on someone else's broken dreams." Ethan was quiet for a moment, considering her words. "Or maybe you're honoring their effort," he suggested. "Continuing what they started, making sure this land doesn't go to waste." Willa smiled at his perspective. "I like that view better," she admitted. "Good," Ethan said, his voice warm in the darkness. "Because I think you belong here, Willa Parker. This land was waiting for you." The conviction in his voice stirred something deep within her, a sense of purpose, of rightness that had been growing since she first set foot on this property. Without thinking, she reached out and placed her hand over his. "Thank you for believing that," she whispered. Ethan turned his hand beneath hers, their fingers intertwining naturally. "It's not hard to believe in someone like you," he replied. They sat like that for several moments, hands joined in the firelight, neither speaking but communicating something profound nonetheless. Eventually, Willa withdrew her hand, suddenly aware of how improper this casual intimacy would seem back east. But this wasn't the East, she reminded herself. This was the frontier, where different rules applied, where a woman could claim land and build a life through her own determination, where a man could help her without expectation of anything in return. "I should rest," she said finally. "Tomorrow will be another long day." Ethan nodded, rising to his feet. "I'll sleep by the wagon," he said. "Call out if you need anything." As Willa settled into her bedroll that night, she found herself more aware than ever of Ethan's presence nearby, a comforting knowledge that she wasn't alone in this wilderness. It occurred to her that, in the space of just 1 week, this man had become essential to her in a way no one had been since her father's death. The realization should have frightened her, but instead, it felt like the most natural thing in the world, as if all her life had been leading her to this place, this moment, this unexpected connection with a man who had promised to pull her from a river or go down trying. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity as the cabin took shape under Caleb's expert guidance. True to his word, the carpenter came every day, sometimes bringing additional helpers from town men who worked for a meal and the satisfaction of participating in the raising of a new homestead. Willa worked alongside them all, learning skills she had never imagined needing: how to notch logs for a secure fit, how to mix mud and straw for chinking between the timbers, how to split shingles for the roof. Her hands grew calloused, her skin tanned by the sun, but her spirit flourished with each day's progress. Ethan was a constant presence, dividing his time between the homestead and his ranch, often arriving before dawn and working until dusk before returning to his own property. He never complained about the arrangement, and Willa never asked why he was willing to work so hard for her benefit. Some truths were better left unspoken, at least for now. As promised, by the end of the 2nd week, the cabin had 4 walls and a roof, simple but solid, with a proper door, 2 windows, and a floor of packed earth that would eventually be replaced with wooden planks. The bedroom remained unfinished, but the main living area was habitable, centered around the original stone fireplace that Caleb had carefully restored. "It's not fancy," the carpenter said as they stood admiring the completed structure, "but it'll keep you warm and dry. That's what counts out here." "It's perfect," Willa replied sincerely, emotion thickening her voice. "I can't begin to thank you enough." Caleb waved off her gratitude, "Just be a good neighbor," he said. "That's payment enough in these parts." After the other helpers had departed, Ethan remained behind to help Willa move her belongings into the cabin. They worked in companionable silence, arranging her few possessions to make the space feel like home. "What do you think?" Willa asked as they stood in the center of the room, surveying their work. A small table and 2 chairs stood near one window, her trunk against another wall. The fireplace dominated one end of the room, with her bedrolls spread nearby until proper furniture could be acquired. "I think it's a fine start," Ethan replied, his eyes taking in the simple space with approval. "Though it could use a rocking chair," Willa laughed. "A rocking chair, that seems like a luxury." "Everyone needs one luxury," Ethan insisted with a smile, "especially on a homestead. Gives you somewhere to sit after a long day's work, somewhere to think and plan." "And where would I acquire such a luxury?" Willa asked, amused by his insistence on this particular item. "Leave that to me," Ethan replied mysteriously. "Consider it a housewarming gift." As evening approached, Willa prepared a special meal to celebrate her first night in the cabin. Venison stew made from a deer Ethan had hunted the previous day, with wild onions and herbs she had gathered from her land. They ate at her small table, the warm light of lanterns casting a golden glow throughout the room. "To new beginnings," Ethan said, raising his cup of coffee in a toast. "And to good friends," Willa added, touching her cup to his. Their eyes met across the table, and Willa felt that now familiar flutter in her chest, a sensation that was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. In the weeks they had known each other, Ethan had become more than just a helper or a neighbor. He had become someone she looked forward to seeing each day, someone whose opinion she valued, whose company she craved. "Willa," Ethan began, his voice taking on a serious tone, "there's something I've been meaning to ask you." Her heart quickened at his expression. "Yes." "The Founders' Day dance is this Saturday," he said, his usual confidence seeming to waver slightly. "I was wondering if you might consider attending, with me." The invitation caught Willa by surprise. She had almost forgotten about the event Victoria had mentioned weeks ago. "As friends?" she asked carefully. A smile tugged at the corner of Ethan's mouth. "If that's what you'd prefer to call it," he replied, "though I had hoped it might be something more." Heat rushed to Willa's cheeks at his directness. "Ethan, you don't have to answer now," he said quickly. "I know it's soon, and you've had so much to adjust to already. Just think about it." Willa nodded, grateful for the reprieve. Her feelings for Ethan had been growing steadily, but she hadn't expected him to acknowledge the connection between them so directly. It was both thrilling and terrifying to have it spoken aloud. "I will think about it," she promised. Later, after Ethan had departed for his own ranch, Willa sat alone by the fire in her new home, contemplating his invitation. The dance would be her first real introduction to the community of Silver Creek, a community she hoped would become her own over time. Going with Ethan would make a statement about their relationship, whatever that might be. Was she ready for that? Ready to be seen as more than just a neighbor or friend to the respected rancher? As Willa drifted off to sleep that night, warm and secure in her cabin, she found her thoughts returning to the moment they had met, to a wagon sinking in a river, and a cowboy who had promised to pull her out or go down with her. In the weeks since, he had kept that promise in ways she couldn't have imagined, helping her build not just a shelter, but the foundations of a new life. Perhaps it was time to acknowledge that what was growing between them deserved a chance to flourish in the light of day, rather than in the shadows of unspoken feelings. When Ethan arrived the next morning, bringing with him seed potatoes and onion sets for her garden, Willa met him with a smile. "Yes," she said simply. He paused, confusion crossing his features. Yes, yes, I'll attend the dance with you on Saturday, she clarified. As something more than friends, if that's still what you want. The smile that spread across Ethan's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, warm and full of promise. It is, he confirmed, his voice rough with emotion. Very much so. The days leading up to the dance were filled with a mixture of anticipation and nerves for Willa. She hadn't packed anything suitable for such an occasion, having expected a life of practical work rather than social engagements. This dilemma was solved unexpectedly when Caleb's wife, Martha, appeared at the homestead 2 days before the dance, carrying a large package. "Heard you might need something for Saturday," the older woman said by way of greeting. "Brought some options." Inside the package were 3 dresses gently worn but still elegant by frontier standards. "These belong to my daughter," Martha explained. "She's back east now, married to a banker of all things. Said I should find good homes for her things rather than letting them sit in trunks." Willa was touched by the thoughtfulness of this woman she had never met. "This is incredibly kind," she said, running her fingers over the soft fabric of a blue dress. "But I couldn't possibly—" "Nonsense," Martha interrupted. "Consider it payment for the apple pies you'll be making us come fall." The woman stayed for tea, sharing stories about Silver Creek and its residents that gave Willa valuable insight into the community she was joining. Martha was forthright but kind in her assessments, painting a picture of a town with its share of conflicts and alliances but ultimately bound together by the common challenges of frontier life. "And what about Ethan?" Willa found herself asking, trying to sound casual. "Has he lived here long?" Martha's eyes twinkled knowingly. 8 years now, came with nothing but his horse and whatever he could carry. Worked harder than any 3 men put together to build that ranch of his. She sipped her tea before adding, "Never seen him take an interest in anyone the way he has with you." Heat rushed to Willa's cheeks. "We're neighbors," she said weakly. "Honey, I've been married 43 years, Martha replied with a chuckle. "I know the difference between being neighborly and what's happening between you two. It's a good thing, mind. Ethan deserves some happiness after everything he's been through." Willa's curiosity piqued. "What do you mean?" Martha's expression turned somber. "Not my story to tell," she said after a moment. "Just know that war leaves marks that don't always show on the outside. Ethan came here carrying burdens most men would have crumpled under." The conversation left Willa with more questions than answers, but also a deeper appreciation for the quiet strength Ethan displayed daily. Whatever shadows haunted him, he had chosen to build something positive in their place. On Saturday evening, Willa stood before the small mirror she had salvaged from her wagon, hardly recognizing the woman who looked back at her. She had chosen the blue dress from Martha's offerings, its color reminiscent of summer skies. With her hair arranged in a simple but elegant style, and a touch of color in her cheeks from her weeks in the sun, she looked healthier and more vibrant than she had in years. The sound of approaching hoofbeats announced Ethan's arrival. Taking a deep breath to steady her nerves, Willa stepped outside to greet him. The expression that crossed Ethan's face when he saw her was worth every moment of anxiety she had felt. He dismounted slowly, his eyes never leaving her. "You look beautiful," he said simply, the sincerity in his voice making the words far more powerful than any elaborate compliment could have been. "Thank you," Willa replied, suddenly shy under his admiring gaze. "Martha Jenkins was kind enough to loan me the dress." "Remind me to thank her," Ethan said with a smile, offering his arm. "Shall we?" The journey to town was filled with easy conversation, though Willa noticed Ethan seemed slightly nervous, a state she found endearing in a man usually so confident. As they approached Silver Creek, The sounds of music and laughter drifted toward them, evidence of the celebration already underway. The town hall had been transformed for the occasion, decorated with lanterns and bunting in honor of the community's founding 20 years earlier. It seemed the entire population of Silver Creek and the surrounding areas had turned out for the event, filling the space with a vibrant energy. As they entered together, Willa was acutely aware of the curious glances directed their way. Clearly, her arrival on Ethan's arm was noteworthy to the townsfolk. "Everyone's staring," she murmured. "Let them," Ethan replied, his hand warm against the small of her back. "They're just surprised to see me at a social event. I don't usually attend these things." Before Willa could respond, they were approached by a distinguished-looking older man with Victoria Blackwell on his arm. "Hayes," the man greeted, extending his hand. "Glad you could make it this year." "Judge Blackwell," Ethan responded, shaking the offered hand. "May I introduce Miss Willa Parker? She's taken over the old Miller homestead northwest of town." The judge's eyebrows rose slightly. "Is that so? Ambitious undertaking for a young woman alone." "I'm not entirely alone," Willa replied with a meaningful glance at Ethan. "The community has been incredibly welcoming." Victoria's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "How fortunate for you," she said, her gaze flicking between Willa and Ethan. "Though the Miller place has quite a history, did Ethan mention what happened to the previous owners?" "Victoria," her father warned quietly. "I only meant that it's important to know the history of one's property," Victoria said innocently. "Especially out here where the past has a way of resurfacing." "If you're referring to the fire, I'm aware of it," Willa replied evenly, though she had in fact known nothing about how the cabin had been destroyed until this moment. "Every property has its stories. I'm more interested in writing new ones." Judge Blackwell chuckled appreciatively. "Well said, Miss Parker. I think you'll fit right in here." He turned to Ethan. "We should discuss that water rights matter sometime soon. Not tonight, of course." "Of course," Ethan agreed. "I'll stop by your office next week." As the Blackwells moved on to greet other guests, Willa turned to Ethan with questioning eyes. "Fire. What was Victoria talking about?" Ethan sighed. "I was planning to tell you when the time was right. The Miller family, they lost their cabin in a fire 3 years ago. The father and oldest son died trying to save their livestock." Willa felt a chill despite the warmth of the crowded room. "Why wouldn't you tell me something like that?" "Because I didn't want it to color how you felt about the land," Ethan explained. "Some folks around here think the place is cursed now. I didn't want that nonsense influencing you. And the toy horse I found, it belonged to a child who lost their father there." Ethan nodded solemnly. "The widow and remaining children moved back east afterward. Land stood empty until your father filed his claim." Willa took a moment to absorb this information, thinking of the small wooden horse she had placed on the mantel of her fireplace, a remembrance of the family whose dreams had ended where hers were beginning. "Thank you for telling me now," she said finally, "even if it should have been sooner." "I'm sorry," Ethan said sincerely. "I wanted to protect you, but that's no excuse." Willa appreciated his honest acknowledgement. "No more secrets," she requested. "I need to know everything about my land, good and bad." "No more secrets," he agreed. The tension dissolved as the band struck up a lively tune and Ethan extended his hand. "Would you care to dance, Miss Parker?" Despite her limited experience with dancing, Willa found herself swept up in the joy of the evening. Ethan proved to be a capable partner, guiding her through the steps with the same quiet confidence he brought to everything. They danced several numbers together before taking a break to enjoy the refreshments provided by the town's ladies' auxiliary. As the evening progressed, Willa was introduced to dozens of Silver Creek residents, ranchers, merchants, miners, and their families. Most were welcoming, curious about the newcomer who had taken on the Miller homestead and seemingly captured the attention of the reserved Ethan Hayes. "You're quite the topic of conversation," Martha Jenkins commented as she joined Willa briefly while Ethan was deep in discussion with several local ranchers. And not just because of that homestead. Willa followed Martha's gaze to where Ethan stood, his profile illuminated by lantern light. "Is it that obvious?" she asked softly. "Only to anyone with eyes," the older woman replied with a wink. "He looks at you the way my Caleb still looks at me after all these years, like you're the answer to a question he's been asking his whole life." The description made Willa's heart flutter. "It's happened so quickly," she admitted. "Sometimes I wonder if it's just gratitude I'm feeling or if it's real," Martha finished for her. "Honey, the heart knows the difference, and out here life moves at its own pace, sometimes quick, sometimes slow. What matters is recognizing the good when it comes your way." As if sensing they were discussing him, Ethan glanced over at that moment, his eyes finding Willa's across the room. The warmth in his gaze seemed to confirm Martha's assessment. "I think I'm beginning to understand that," Willa said quietly. The evening culminated with a traditional waltz, during which Ethan held Willa closer than was strictly proper by Eastern standards. As they moved together across the floor, the rest of the room seemed to fade away until it was just the two of them, connected by more than just joined hands. "I've never enjoyed one of these dances before tonight," Ethan confessed, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Because of me?" Willa asked, unable to hide her pleased smile. "Because of you," he confirmed. "Everything is different with you here, Willa, better, clearer somehow." The sincerity in his words made her breath catch. "I feel the same," she admitted. "Even with everything that's happened, the wagon. Starting over, I can't help feeling that it all led me where I was meant to be." As the final notes of the waltz faded, Ethan's gaze held hers with an intensity that made her heart race. For a moment, she thought he might kiss her right there in front of the entire town. Instead, he took her hand and led her toward the door. "Let's get some air," he suggested. Outside, the night was clear and cool, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. They walked a short distance from the town hall, finding a quiet spot near the edge of town where the sounds of the celebration were muted by distance. "Victoria seemed surprised to see us together," Willa observed, breaking the comfortable silence between them. Ethan chuckled. "Victoria has had certain expectations regarding our relationship for years. Her father owns the largest water rights in the county, which would be a valuable addition to any ranch." "And you weren't interested in that arrangement?" Willa asked, trying to keep her tone casual. "A marriage should be built on more than business interests," Ethan replied simply. "Victoria deserves someone who loves her for herself, not for her father's water rights." "And what do you deserve, Ethan Hayes?" Willa asked softly, turning to face him fully. His expression grew serious in the moonlight. "For a long time, I didn't think I deserved much of anything," he admitted. "The war, it changes a man, makes him question everything he thought he knew about himself, about humanity." Willa waited, sensing he needed to share this part of himself with her. "I came west because I couldn't face going home," Ethan continued. "Couldn't face my family after some of the things I'd done, seen. Thought maybe I could lose myself out here or at least outrun the memories. Did it work?" Willa asked gently. "Not entirely," he said with a sad smile, "but building something, the ranch, a life it helped, gave me purpose again." He took her hands in his. "And then a stubborn woman got her wagon stuck in the Snake River, and suddenly I found myself caring about someone more than I had in years." Willa's heart pounded against her ribs. "Ethan," she whispered, his name a question and answer all at once. "I know it's soon," he said earnestly. "I know we've only known each other a short while, but I've never been more certain of anything than I am of how I feel about you, Willa Parker." Before she could respond, he closed the distance between them, his lips finding hers in a kiss that was both gentle and profound. Willa's hands moved to his shoulders, then his neck as she returned the kiss with equal feeling, all her doubts dissolving in the warmth of their connection. When they finally parted, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since I pulled you from that river," he confessed. "Why didn't you?" Willa asked, a smile playing at her lips. "Didn't want to frighten you away," he replied with a soft laugh. "Figured a half-drowned woman had enough to worry about without a love-struck cowboy complicating matters." "Love-struck," Willa repeated, her heart leaping at the word. Ethan's expression turned serious again. "Yes," he said simply. "I love you, Willa. I know it's fast and probably foolish, but it's true all the same." The declaration, so direct and unadorned, was perfectly in keeping with everything she had come to know about this man. No flowery phrases or elaborate declarations, just honest truth, offered without expectation or demand. "It doesn't feel foolish to me," Willa replied softly. "It feels like the most sensible thing in the world, actually." Hope dawned in Ethan's eyes. "Does that mean, 'I love you too'?" she confirmed, the words coming easily now that they had been given voice. "I think I started falling for you when you said you'd pull me out of that river or go down with me. No one had ever made me a promise like that before." Ethan's smile was radiant in the moonlight. "Best promise I ever made," he said before kissing her again, more deeply this time, his arms encircling her waist to draw her closer. When they eventually returned to the dance, hand in hand, the knowing smiles that greeted them suggested their absence had not gone unnoticed. Willa found she didn't mind. This community would be her home now, these people her neighbors. And the man beside her, he would be her future, if she had any say in the matter. As summer gave way to autumn, Willa's homestead transformed under her care and Ethan's continued help. The cabin was completed, with wooden floors installed and the promised rocking chair handcrafted by Ethan himself, taking pride of place near the fireplace. A small barn had been raised to house her oxen, and the 2 milk cows Ethan had insisted were essential to any proper homestead. The garden had produced a modest harvest despite its late planting, and Willa had preserved what she could for the winter ahead. The apple trees, carefully pruned, had yielded enough fruit for dozens of pies, many of which had been shared with neighbors who had helped with the cabin raising. Ethan divided his time between his ranch and Willa's homestead, often riding over at dawn to help with the heavier work before returning to his own property. The arrangement worked well enough, though the 4-mile journey between their homes began to feel increasingly inconvenient as their feelings for each other deepened. On a crisp October evening, as they sat together on the porch of Willa's cabin watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple, Ethan broached the subject that had been on both their minds. "Winter's coming," he observed, his arm around Willa's shoulders as they shared the rocking chair he had built. "First snow could be any day now." Willa agreed, leaning into his warmth. "Martha says it'll be a hard one. The squirrels have been gathering extra nuts, apparently." Ethan chuckled. "Martha's weather predictions are more reliable than the almanac." He paused, his hand gently stroking Willa's arm. "I've been thinking." "A dangerous pastime," she teased. "Indeed," he agreed with a smile, "but necessary in this case." He shifted slightly to face her better. "These past months have been the happiest of my life, Willa. Being with you, helping build this place, watching you make this land your own, it's been a privilege. Willa felt a flutter of anticipation at his serious tone. "For me as well," she said softly. "The thing is," Ethan continued, "riding back and forth between our properties is going to be near impossible once the heavy snows come. The creek freezes over in places, makes the crossing treacherous." "I've been worried about that," Willa admitted. "I've grown used to seeing you every day. The thought of being cut off for weeks at a time is—" She trailed off, not wanting to sound too dependent. "Unacceptable," Ethan finished for her. "At least to me." He took a deep breath. "Which is why I think we should consider a more permanent arrangement." Willa's heart began to race. "What sort of arrangement?" she asked, though she suspected she knew where this conversation was heading. Ethan reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object, which he held out to her. In his palm lay a simple gold band, unadorned but beautifully crafted. "I'm not good with fancy words," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "But I love you, Willa Parker. I want to build a life with you, whether here on your homestead or at my ranch or somewhere new entirely. I don't care where, as long as we're together." Tears sprang to Willa's eyes as the reality of his proposal washed over her. "Are you asking me to marry you, Ethan Hayes?" "I am," he confirmed, a nervous smile playing at his lips. "Though I'm making a mess of it, I'm afraid." "No," Willa said, shaking her head as she placed her hand over his, enclosing the ring between their palms. "You're doing it perfectly." Hope bloomed in Ethan's eyes. "Is that a yes?" Instead of answering, Willa leaned forward and kissed him deeply, pouring all her love and certainty into the gesture. When they finally parted, both breathless, she smiled. "Yes," she whispered against his lips. 1,000 times yes." Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger where it fit as if made for her. "It was my grandmother's," he explained. "The only family heirloom I brought west with me." Willa admired the simple band, touched by its history and significance. "It's beautiful," she said sincerely, "and perfect." As night descended fully, they remained on the porch, discussing their future together, whether to maintain both properties or focus on one, how to combine their respective livelihoods, when to hold the wedding. "Martha will insist on hosting it at the church," Willa predicted with a laugh. "Let her," Ethan said, kissing the top of Willa's head. "After everything this town has done to help you establish your homestead, it seems fitting to celebrate with them." They agreed on a December wedding before the worst of winter set in. The timing would allow them to be settled as husband and wife before the heaviest snows made travel difficult. News of their engagement spread quickly through Silver Creek, met with general approval and more than a few comments about how it had been obvious from the start that the two were destined for each other. Martha Jenkins immediately took charge of wedding preparations, declaring that the town's newest resident deserved a proper celebration. Victoria Blackwell's reaction was more measured. When she encountered Willa in the general store a week after the engagement, her congratulations seemed genuine if reserved. "Ethan is a good man," she acknowledged. "One of the best in these parts. I hope you appreciate what you have in him." "I do," Willa assured her. "More than I can express." Victoria nodded thoughtfully. "Then I wish you both happiness," she said, surprising Willa with her graciousness. "This territory needs more stable families, more children raised with proper values." The mention of children brought a blush to Willa's cheeks. She and Ethan had spoken of family only in general terms, but the prospect of children, of building a legacy together on the land they both loved, filled her with quiet joy. As the wedding approached, Ethan and Willa made the practical decision to make the ranch their primary residence, at least initially. It offered more established accommodations and was closer to town, which would be important during Willa's first winter in the territory. The homestead would remain theirs, as well as second property to be developed over time, perhaps as a home for their children someday. On their wedding day, snow dusted the ground, transforming Silver Creek into a winter wonderland. The small church was filled to capacity with townsfolk who had come to witness the union of the respected rancher and the determined homesteader whose love story had captured their collective imagination. Willa wore a dress of ivory satin that Martha and several other women had worked on for weeks, adapting a gown that had been ordered from Denver but required significant alterations. Her hair was arranged in soft curls, adorned with sprigs of evergreen in lieu of traditional flowers. Caleb Jenkins gave her away, a role he had accepted with tears in his eyes when Willa had asked him. "Would have been your father's honor," he had said, "but I'm mighty proud to stand in his place." When Ethan saw her walking toward him down the church's center aisle, his expression of wonder and love was worth every hardship Willa had endured to reach this moment. In his eyes, she saw not just the present but their future years of building, growing, loving, facing whatever challenges the frontier might present together. The ceremony itself was simple but meaningful, their vows spoken clearly for all to hear. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Ethan's kiss was both tender and promising, drawing good-natured cheers from the assembled guests. The celebration afterward lasted well into the evening, with food and music and dancing at the town hall. As the newlyweds prepared to depart for the ranch, Martha pressed a package into Willa's hands. "A wedding gift," she explained, "from all of us ladies, something to remember this day by." Later that night, in the warmth of the ranch house that was now their shared home, Willa opened the package to find a quilt beautifully crafted from squares of fabric contributed by different women in the community. Each piece told a story: calico from a child's first dress, muslin from wedding sheets, sturdy denim from work clothes. Together they formed a tapestry of Silver Creek's history, now entrusted to its newest family. "It's beautiful," Willa whispered, running her fingers over the intricate stitching. "Like its owner," Ethan replied, drawing her into his arms. "Mrs. Hayes." The name, still new to her ears, filled Willa with a sense of belonging she had searched for since her parents' deaths. Here in this man's arms, in this community, on this wild but beautiful land, she had found her place at last. "I love you," she said, reaching up to touch his face gently. "Thank you for pulling me from that river." Ethan's smile was tender as he leaned down to kiss her. "Best decision I ever made," he murmured against her lips, "though I was prepared to go down with you if necessary." "I know," Willa replied, secure in the knowledge that this man would always keep his promises. "That's why I loved you even then, I think, because you meant it." Spring came to Silver Creek in a riot of wildflowers and new growth, the land reawakening after a winter that had indeed proven harsh, just as Martha had predicted. The months of snow and bitter cold had been a trial for Willa, unused to the extremes of frontier weather. But they had also been a blessing in disguise, giving her and Ethan time to truly build their life together, to learn each other's habits and rhythms in the intimate confines of their ranch house. Now, as April sunshine warmed the earth, Willa stood on the homestead property, surveying the changes a year had brought. The cabin stood solid and welcoming, maintained through the winter whenever weather permitted visits. The garden plot had been expanded, ready for this year's planting. New saplings had been added to the original apple orchard, pear and cherry trees that would eventually diversify their harvest. Ethan approached from the creek, where he had been checking the water levels after the spring melt. "Thinking deep thoughts?" he asked, coming to stand beside her. "Just reflecting," Willa replied, leaning against him as his arms circled her waist. A year ago, I was traveling alone toward an uncertain future, everything I owned in a wagon that ended up at the bottom of a river. And now, Ethan prompted, his voice warm with affection. Willa turned to face him, her hands resting lightly on his chest. Now I have a home. 2 homes, actually, she added with a smile. A husband I adore, friends who have become family, and soon. Her hand moved to rest on her stomach, where the first subtle evidence of their child was beginning to show. Ethan's face lit up with the same wonder it had displayed when she had first shared the news of her pregnancy 2 months earlier. Soon, a family of our own, he finished, covering her hand with his. The baby was due in late summer, a first child that would be born into a home filled with love and stability, surrounded by a community that had embraced Willa as one of their own. Already, Martha Jenkins was organizing the creation of a cradle, while other women in town were preparing layettes and tiny garments for the newest member of Silver Creek. I was thinking, Willa said, as they walked hand in hand around the property, that perhaps we should consider making the homestead our main residence by next spring. There's room to expand the cabin, and with the baby. You want to raise our child here? Ethan asked, surveying the homestead with new eyes. Willa nodded. I know the ranch is more established, but there's something about this land. It's where I first felt like I was building something that truly belonged to me, to us, and somehow it feels right to raise our family here. Ethan considered her words thoughtfully. The ranch can be managed by Wesley, he said, referring to his foreman who had proven exceptionally capable. We could maintain both properties, divide our time as needed. Is that possible? Willa asked, hopeful but realistic about the challenges of frontier life. With you, anything is possible, Ethan replied with the confidence that had first drawn her to him. Besides, I've already been thinking about how to expand this cabin. A proper bedroom for us, a nursery, perhaps a study eventually. Willa's heart swelled with love for this man who continued to support her dreams, who saw their future as a collaboration rather than a competition of wills. Have I told you today how much I love you, Ethan Hayes? You have, he confirmed with a smile, but I wouldn't object to hearing it again. Instead of speaking, Willa rose on tiptoes to kiss him deeply, pouring all her emotion into the gesture. When they parted, both slightly breathless, Ethan's eyes were dark with desire and love. We should head back to the ranch, he suggested, his voice husky. Unless you'd prefer to christen that bearskin rug in the cabin, Willa laughed, her cheeks flushing at his suggestion. Marriage had revealed a playful side to her serious cowboy that never failed to delight her. The cabin it is, she agreed. After all, we should make ourselves at home if we're going to live here permanently. Hand in hand, they walked toward the simple structure that had been the beginning of their story together, a homestead born from tragedy transformed by love into the foundation of a family's future. As the summer progressed, so did the plans for expanding the homestead cabin. Ethan hired Caleb Jenkins and several other skilled workers to begin construction, while Willa focused on preparing for the baby's arrival. Her garden thrived under her attentive care, providing fresh vegetables for their table and extra to preserve for the coming winter. By August, the cabin addition was nearly complete: a spacious bedroom, a smaller nursery, and a covered porch that wrapped around 2 sides of the structure, offering views of both the creek and the distant mountains. The original cabin space had been transformed into a comfortable living area and kitchen, centered around the stone fireplace that had survived the Miller family tragedy years before. On a warm evening in late August, as Willa rocked gently in the chair Ethan had made her, she felt the first insistent contractions that signaled their child's imminent arrival. Ethan, who had been watching her with increasing concern throughout the day, was at her side immediately. "Is it time?" he asked, his voice steady despite the worry in his eyes. Willa nodded, gripping his hand as another contraction tightened across her abdomen. "I think so," she managed, "but it's too soon to ride into town for the doctor." Ethan's jaw set with determination. "Martha Jenkins lives closer than town," he said. "I'll go for her first, then send someone for Dr. Wilson." Within the hour, Martha arrived, bringing with her decades of experience helping women through childbirth on the frontier. She efficiently took charge, sending Ethan to fetch water and linens while she helped Willa into the bedroom. "First babies often take their time," she reassured Willa as she examined her. "But everything looks to be progressing normally. We'll have plenty of time for the doctor to arrive." True to Martha's prediction, Willa's labor continued through the night and into the following day. Ethan remained by her side throughout, his steady presence a comfort even as the pain intensified. By mid-afternoon, when Dr. Wilson had arrived and confirmed that all was proceeding as it should, Willa was exhausted but determined. "You're the strongest woman I've ever known," Ethan whispered during a brief respite between contractions. "You can do this, Willa. Our child is lucky to have you for a mother." His words gave her renewed strength as the final, most challenging phase of labor began. With Martha and the doctor's guidance, and Ethan's unwavering support, Willa brought their son into the world just as the sun began to set on August 27, 1876. "A perfect boy, Dr. Wilson announced, placing the squalling infant on Willa's chest after cutting the cord. "Strong lungs, good color. Congratulations to you both." Tears streamed down Willa's face as she cradled their son, his tiny features scrunched in protest at his abrupt entry into the world. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "We've been waiting for you." Ethan, his own eyes suspiciously bright, leaned down to touch their child's head with a gentle finger. "He's magnificent," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "just like his mother." They named him James, after Willa's father, with Henry as his middle name, a tribute to the rancher who had mentored Ethan when he first came west. James Henry Hayes entered the world weighing 8 pounds even, with a dusting of dark hair and eyes that, once they opened fully, proved to be the same clear blue as his father's. The news of his birth spread quickly through Silver Creek, and in the days that followed, a steady stream of visitors arrived at the homestead, bearing gifts and good wishes for the new family. Even Victoria Blackwell came, bringing a hand-knitted blanket of the softest wool and offering what seemed to be genuine congratulations. "He's beautiful," she said, looking down at the sleeping infant in Willa's arms. "Silver Creek's newest citizen deserves the best start in life." As the visitors departed and quiet returned to the homestead, Willa and Ethan settled into their new roles as parents. Nights were often interrupted by their son's hungry cries, but they established a rhythm that allowed them to share the responsibilities, Ethan bringing the baby to Willa for nighttime feedings, changing the cloth diapers with more skill than Willa would have expected from a rancher. On a crisp October evening, as James slept peacefully in his cradle, Willa and Ethan sat together on their new porch, wrapped in a quilt against the autumn chill. The valley stretched before them, painted in the golds and reds of the season, the creek a silver ribbon winding through their property. "Do you ever think about that day at the river?" Willa asked, her head resting on Ethan's shoulder. "How different our lives might have been if you hadn't come along when you did." Ethan's arm tightened around her. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But I prefer to think it was meant to be that no matter what route you took, what river you crossed, somehow we would have found each other." Willa smiled at his unexpected romanticism. "The wagon sinking was a rather dramatic first meeting," she mused. though it did show me your character immediately. Not many men would have risked their lives for a stranger." "You were never really a stranger," Ethan said thoughtfully. "Even then, there was something about you that felt familiar. Like I'd been waiting to meet you my whole life without realizing it." From inside the cabin came the soft sounds of their son stirring. Willa moved to rise, but Ethan gently held her in place. "I'll go," he said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "You rest." Willa watched as her husband disappeared into the cabin, returning moments later with their son cradled expertly in his arms. The sight of Ethan, strong, capable, sometimes still haunted by memories of war, holding their child with such tenderness, never failed to move her deeply. "I think he just wanted to join us," Ethan said, settling back beside Willa with James nestled against his chest. "Can't blame him for wanting to see this view." As the three of them sat together on the porch of their homestead, watching the sun set over the land they had claimed as their own, Willa felt a sense of completion that had once seemed impossible. The journey that had begun with loss, her parents, her possessions, nearly her life in that treacherous river, had led to this moment of perfect contentment. "I love you," she said simply, the words encompassing both her husband and the child they had created together. "Both of you, more than I can express." Ethan's free arm encircled her shoulders, drawing her closer. "And we love you," he replied, his voice a gentle rumble against James's sleeping form. "Always will." As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Willa reflected on the promise Ethan had made that day at the river to pull her out or go down with her. It had been more than just a dramatic declaration in a moment of crisis. It had been the foundation of everything that followed. Through every challenge they had faced together, every triumph they had celebrated, that promise had held true. And now, as they built their life together in this wild, beautiful territory, raising their son in a home created through shared effort and surrounded by a community that had become family, Willa knew with absolute certainty that neither of them would ever truly sink because they had each other to hold on to, come what may. The wagon might have been lost to the river that day, but what Willa had found instead was worth immeasurably more. A love as vast as the western sky, as enduring as the mountains that stood sentinel over their home, and as genuine as the man who had kept his word in ways neither of them could have imagined when their story began.